I was 15 years old when my family moved into a new house during a cold December in Alberta. Before that, we lived in a small apartment in the suburbs. The space was getting too tight, especially because my mother was expecting my little sister soon. My parents started searching for a larger place where we could grow as a family. A house a few blocks away went up for sale at a very low price. The place looked old and a little worn down, and the neighborhood was not the best part of town. But the house had space. That was the most important thing for us. My parents decided to buy it. After moving in, my father started doing small renovations with the money we had left. Most of the work happened in the basement. The area had been dirty and unfinished when we arrived. The floors were rough, and the walls looked neglected. My father cleaned the entire space. He installed new carpet and reinforced a few support beams. The bathroom was repaired and the walls were covered with fresh wallpaper. I even got to choose the pattern for my room. For the first few months, everything felt exciting and new. The house slowly started to feel like home. The first strange moment happened on my father's birthday. We had gone out to dinner that evening to celebrate. When we returned home later that night, something immediately felt wrong. The front door of the house stood wide open. My mother froze the moment she saw it. My father searched the house while my mother and I waited outside and contacted the police. The minutes felt painfully slow while we waited for help to arrive. Eventually, the police searched the entire house. Nothing had been stolen. No one was found inside. However, several things in the house had clearly been moved. Some items had been knocked over. The books on my bookshelf in the basement had been scattered across the floor. After that night, I started noticing strange sounds in the house. Most of the time, the noises came from the walls or from somewhere beneath the basement floor. Because the house was old, I convinced myself it was only pipes or the natural sounds buildings sometimes make. Still, the noises continued. One night, something happened that I could not explain. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was lying in bed under my blankets. I was secretly playing my Nintendo DS with the volume turned completely off so my parents would not hear me. Then I heard it. Laughter. The sound came from the wall beside my bed. It was quiet, but clear enough that I knew I had not imagined it. My entire body froze as I stared into the darkness of my room. For a long time, I did not move. Eventually, the silence returned and nothing else happened. After half an hour of lying completely still, I convinced myself that exhaustion had tricked my mind. Life returned to normal for a while after that. A few months later, my little sister was born. Because the basement was large enough, my parents placed her crib in my room. My mother trusted me to keep an eye on her during the night. One evening, my parents went out for a late dinner and left me home alone to watch the house. I was sitting in the living room watching a movie when I went into the kitchen to get something to eat. That was when I noticed strange sounds coming from the baby monitor. The monitor connected to the unit near my sister's crib in the basement. The sound coming through the speaker was unmistakable. Heavy footsteps. My stomach dropped as the noise continued. A moment later, my sister began crying loudly. Then another sound followed. A faint whispering noise came through the monitor, followed by a loud crash. Fear rushed through me. I grabbed my father's rifle from my parents' bedroom even though I knew it was locked and unloaded. Holding it still made me feel less helpless. I slowly approached the basement door. The stairs felt longer than usual as I walked down them. My hands were shaking as I reached the bottom and looked toward my sister's crib. The room appeared empty. My sister was crying and the baby monitor lay on the floor beside the crib. It looked like it had been knocked over. I quickly picked her up and carried her upstairs. I shut the basement door behind me and blocked it with a chair. After that, I called my parents. They contacted the police immediately and rushed home. When the police arrived, they searched the entire house. At first, they found nothing unusual. Just as they were about to leave, my father remembered something about my room. In the basement, there was a large bookshelf built directly into the wall. My father asked the officer to look behind it. When they pushed the bookshelf aside, it moved. Behind it was a hidden space inside the wall. A small, unfinished room filled with pipes ran through that area. On the floor were food wrappers, an empty cup from our kitchen, lotion, and a switchblade. There was also an apple that had been partially eaten. Someone had been living inside our house. The window inside that hidden space was wide open. A chair had been placed beneath it. The police believed the person had escaped through that window while everyone was outside. A few days later, I returned to the hidden space on my own. Curiosity pushed me to explore it more carefully. While examining the walls, I noticed a tiny hole drilled through the drywall. When I leaned closer and looked through it, my stomach twisted. The hole pointed directly toward my bed. From that hidden room, someone had been able to watch everything in my bedroom. They could see me while I slept, played games, did homework, or changed clothes. Someone had been observing my life for months without me knowing. Years have passed since then. I live in my own apartment now. But sometimes, late at night, I still remember that hidden space behind my wall. And I still wonder how long that person had been there before we ever discovered the truth. I moved into a new house with my parents and my little sister in 2017. The house sat in a quiet suburban area outside the city. The street was calm and lined with similar homes. Trees stood behind most of the houses, and the nights were usually peaceful. At first, the place felt safe. It felt like the kind of neighborhood where nothing strange ever happened. My bedroom was on the lower level of the house, between the basement and the main floor. It was almost at ground level. One side of the room touched the garage wall, and the other side had a large window that looked out into the backyard. The yard behind the house was wide and surrounded by fences and trees. During the day, it looked normal and quiet. The window in my room had old plastic vertical blinds. Some of the panels were missing. Even when the blinds were closed, small gaps remained between them. Through those thin openings, I could still see parts of the backyard. The closet in my room had large mirror doors that faced my bed. When I lay down at night, the mirror reflected the window behind me. For the first year, nothing unusual happened. I spent many nights in my room watching videos on my tablet before falling asleep. I often stayed awake very late because sleep did not come easily. One hot night during the summer, I left my window open. Warm air filled the room and the house did not have air conditioning yet. The only breeze came through that open window. While watching a video, I heard a faint sound outside. It sounded like soft movement across the ground. I paused the video and listened carefully. The sound disappeared immediately. The backyard became silent again. I told myself the noise must have come from the video. The thought felt reasonable, so I pressed play again. A few minutes later, the sound returned. It was soft and slow, almost like someone shifting their weight on grass or dirt. I looked toward the window but saw nothing through the narrow gaps in the blinds. Eventually, I fell asleep and forgot about it. For several nights after that, nothing happened. Then the sound returned again late one night while I was watching another video. This time, the noise lasted longer. I paused the video again and listened. The backyard was completely dark. I could not see anything through the blinds, but the silence outside felt heavy. After a moment, I thought I heard breathing. The sound was very faint, like air slowly moving in and out. I stayed still on my bed and stared toward the window. My heart beat faster as the seconds passed. I tried to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. To distract myself, I turned my head toward the closet mirror instead of the window. I picked up my tablet again and prepared to resume the video. That was when I noticed movement in the reflection. Through one of the small gaps in the blinds, the mirror showed a shape shifting outside the window. It was quick and dark, like a shadow passing by. Cold fear spread through my body. I left my room and woke my parents. They checked the backyard carefully, walking around the fence and the corners of the house. Everything looked empty and quiet. No footprints, no signs of anyone there. After that night, I tried to forget about what I had seen. Weeks passed before the sounds returned again. Sometimes it happened only once a month, always late at night, always after the house had gone quiet. Soft footsteps, gentle shuffling, sometimes that faint breathing sound. Each time I forced myself to believe it was nothing. When winter came, snow covered the ground and the noises stopped completely. I began to believe that the whole thing had just been my imagination. But when spring returned the following year, the sounds came back. They were never loud, Never obvious, just small hints that someone or something might be outside the window. I stopped looking directly at the window. I avoided the mirror too. Fear grew slowly inside me, but I kept pushing it down. One night I looked at the mirror again. In the reflection, I saw a shape standing outside the window. It looked like the outline of a person. The figure stayed perfectly still. I ran upstairs again, and once again nothing was found outside. After that, I tried to change my habits. I went to sleep earlier. I watched videos with headphones and avoided looking toward the window at night. The pattern continued for years. The sounds always stopped during winter and returned when the weather grew warm again. Then one night during a strong winter storm, everything finally became clear. The wind howled outside and shook the trees in the yard. I left my room late that night to get water from the kitchen. My parents were still awake in the living room, which was unusual. Their faces looked tense and worried. Shortly after that, flashing red and blue lights appeared outside the house. A police car arrived in the driveway. Soon I learned what had happened. Earlier that night, my father had stepped outside during the storm to check the backyard. As he looked across the yard, the light from my bedroom window revealed something standing near it. A man stood just outside my window. He was completely still, facing the glass. The moment my father moved toward him, the man ran. He jumped the back fence quickly and disappeared into the dark yards behind the houses. When I heard that, a deep fear settled in my chest. Every sound I had heard for years suddenly made sense. The footsteps, the breathing, the shadows in the mirror. Someone had truly been there. For years. The police searched the area but found nothing. Cameras were installed around the house after that night. The backyard became brighter and more secure. Even now, the memory still stays with me. Sometimes when the house becomes quiet late at night, I remember the mirror reflecting my window. I remember the faint movement behind the blinds. What frightens me most is not the man who stood outside. What frightens me most is how long he stood there without anyone knowing. I moved into a small house in the countryside 3 years ago. The road was quiet and long, with open fields and tall trees on both sides. I liked the silence of the place. The air smelled clean and the nights were dark and peaceful. I felt proud because it was the first house I ever owned. Life felt simple there, and every morning I woke up feeling calm. The house next to mine was larger. It had a driveway and a wide garage. For a long time, a friendly couple lived there. I always felt safe knowing someone kind lived so close. When they moved away and sold the house, I felt a little sad, but I also felt curious about who would come next. Not long after that, a new couple moved into the house. I saw them carrying boxes inside during a cloudy afternoon. I watched quietly from my porch. They looked normal, just another family moving into the countryside. At first, nothing seemed strange. The first few nights were quiet, but after a week I began hearing noises late at night. Sometimes heavy banging came from the walls of their house. Other nights, loud music shook the quiet air. The sounds would start suddenly in the middle of the night and then stop just as quickly. I tried to ignore it, but it made sleep difficult. The strange sounds kept happening. Some nights were silent, but other nights felt restless. The darkness outside my window seemed deeper when the banging started. I began to feel uneasy even though I could not explain why. One evening I noticed their car parked outside with deep scratches along both sides. The metal looked torn like it had scraped against something hard. The damage looked serious. I stood on my porch staring at it for a long time. Something about it felt wrong. It looked like the car had crashed more than once. Days passed, and the uneasy feeling grew stronger. One evening I heard loud movement outside again. My heart started beating faster when I looked out the window. 2 strange men were near the neighbor's house. They moved quickly near the door and windows. I watched from inside my dark living room. The men looked around like they were searching for something. The quiet countryside suddenly felt dangerous. I called the police and waited in silence. By the time the police arrived, the men were gone. The yard looked empty again. The wind moved slowly through the trees like nothing had happened. A week later, something even worse happened. I was sitting in my living room when I heard a loud crash outside. The sound shook the house. I rushed to the window and looked out. A car had crashed straight into the neighbor's front door. The front garden was torn apart. 2 men jumped out of the car and ran inside the house. They started carrying expensive electronics outside and throwing them into the car. My chest felt tight as I watched. The quiet street no longer felt safe. Sirens soon echoed in the distance. Police cars rushed into the street and blocked the road. The men tried to escape, but the police surrounded them quickly. While the officers dealt with them outside, I noticed something strange. Movement still came from inside the house. The door opened again and another man was dragged out by police. I thought the nightmare was over. But later that night something happened that frightened me more than anything before. My dog began growling softly near the door. The growl was low and slow. It was the kind of sound my dog made when someone stood outside. I checked the small camera near the door. My heart dropped when I saw a man standing on the porch. His face looked swollen and covered with dark stains. One eye was almost closed and his body looked weak. He stood there for a long time. The night was silent except for the wind moving through the trees. I stayed inside and watched the screen, feeling frozen. After a while, a car slowly entered the street. The man suddenly moved and hid behind my parked cars in the driveway. He crouched low in the shadows like he did not want to be seen. The car stopped in front of his house. A woman stepped out and walked toward the door. The streetlight cast a pale yellow glow across the road. The moment she looked toward my driveway, she saw him hiding there. She walked slowly toward him. I watched from the camera screen, barely breathing. The night felt heavy and strange. They stood there together under the dim streetlight for a long moment. The woman suddenly began crying loudly. The sound echoed through the empty street and made my skin crawl. The man stood still. His body looked broken and tired. After some time, they both walked back to the car and drove away into the darkness. The street became quiet again. The wind moved gently across the empty road. 3 days passed after that night. I never saw the man again. Only the woman returned to the house. The place looked empty and silent. Even now, when I sit in my house late at night, I sometimes think about that strange week. The countryside is peaceful again, but the silence feels different now. Sometimes I look at the empty house next door and wonder what really happened there. And sometimes I feel thankful that whatever dark story lived inside that house drove away before it reached my door.